Hello, and welcome to session 6B, Building a Statewide Digital Readiness Community of Practice. This session has been sponsored by NEDCC, the Northeast Document Conservation Center. I am Anna Tunnicliffe, and I'm a member of the MAC 2021 Program Committee. Before I turn it over to our session presenters, I'd like to go over a few logistical details. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. This session also has a chat feature enabled, which you are free to use to make comments or share relevant information with your colleagues. But try to direct questions to the Q&A so that they're not missed. I would also like to share MAC's expectations for conduct, and I'll put that in the chat shortly. By participating in this session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and other session participants. Any type of harassing or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments, slurs or epithets, threats or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disrupting behavior, that person will be removed. Thank you for following these guidelines. Finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experiences via social media. I will be adding to the chat suggested conference hashtags, hashtag VirtualMAC2021 and hashtag S6B Statewide Digital Readiness. All right, I'm going to turn this over to the presenters. We'll start with Vicki.
Hi, thanks so much, Anna. My name is Vicki Tobias, and I am going to be kicking us off this afternoon. We're excited to share with you our project, Building a Digital Readiness Community of Practice. We'll provide an introduction to our project and the concept of digital readiness and how we're building community around this type of work. We'll share some of the community-driven tools and resources developed as part of this work to date. You'll also hear from two members of our Project Launch Committee who will share their thoughts and experiences related to digital readiness. And finally, we'll have time for your questions and comments at the end of our presentation, but also feel free to share your comments in chat and your questions in the Q&A, as Anna mentioned, as they occur to you throughout our session. So let's get started with some introductions. Janine Mollett Van Beckham has served as the Curator of Collections and Exhibits for the Tower Heritage Center since 2008. The Tower Heritage Center is owned and operated by the Washington County Historical Society in West Bend, Wisconsin. Prior to this, Janine worked as their archivist for 2 years. She holds a BA and a BS in anthropology, as well as a certificate in museum studies from the University of Milwaukee. Robin Unz currently serves as the president of and curator for the Lake Mills Aztalan Historical Society, a position she's held since 2013. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Museum Studies and Art History from Carroll University. Robin is the founder and leader of the Lake Mills Preservation Guild, a subgroup of her organization made up of community members with the mission to preserve and share the unique character of Lake Mills historic sites, buildings, and heritage. Robin also serves as the municipal clerk for the town of Lake Mills. You'll also hear from Kristen Whitson. Kristen is the program assistant for the Digital Readiness Community of Practice project through Wills and Recollection, Wisconsin. Kristen has worked for the UW-Madison Archives, University Archives, the Wisconsin Historical Society, the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, and volunteered in several other archives-related projects. Her interests in digital archives, digital preservation, and digital projects came together while she earned her BA from Northern Arizona University and her MLS degree from the UW-Madison iSchool. And finally, my name is Vicki Tobias, and I'm currently a project manager for Wills and Recollection, Wisconsin. My previous experience includes positions with the UW-Madison Archives, the UW Digital Collections Center, and the Wisconsin Historical Society, doing all sorts of digital curation type work. I have a BA in history from the University of Nebraska and an MLS degree from the UW-Madison iSchool. So to begin, what is building a digital readiness community of practice? This one-year project began in October 2020. It builds on work completed through a 2019 National Historical Publications and Records Commission, NHPRC, planning grant, and will support digital readiness in small and under-resourced local historical societies and historic preservation organizations across the state of Wisconsin. WILS, Recollection Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Historical Society staff provide support for this community-driven venture, along with our launch committee comprised of librarians, archivists, and other local history practitioners who participated in our planning grant work. In short, we're building a collaborative, community-driven program to foster skills and infrastructure necessary to build confidence and competence in digital work and help Wisconsin local history organizations grow and sustain their digital programs. So, two key concepts provide the foundation and structure for this project and our work: digital readiness and community of practice. So there are quite a few definitions floating around for digital readiness, but for our project, we define digital readiness broadly as having the knowledge, tools, resources, and infrastructure to provide online public access to archives and historical records. As described by Wegner, McDermott, and Snyder in their 2002 book, Cultivating Communities of Practice, a community of practice is a group of people who share a common concern, set of problems, or passion about a topic, and deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. So many of you are likely already participating in communities of practice as part of your work or extracurricular or philanthropic activities. But we're really excited to draw on our existing relationships and networks throughout Wisconsin to connect folks who share an interest in and experience doing digital project work. And we hope through this year-long project to expand this community to include folks new to this type of work as well. We have a bunch of information about our project on our project website, and Kristen threw the link in chat. But in short, there are two key project goals and outcomes for us this year. First, to increase preservation of and access to historical materials through a set of systematic approaches and by providing resources to attain those goals. And second, to provide resources and support through a statewide community of practice where participants can share best practices and experience. Some additional benefits and project outcomes will include systems and procedures to guide digitization efforts and help organizations stay consistent during periods of staff or volunteer turnover, increased opportunities for engagement with staff and volunteers in digital and virtual environments, conversations with and connections to other organizations who are doing digital work, and, as I said earlier, an ability to confidently pursue digitization projects that support reference, exhibitions, programming, digital storytelling, and all the other ways we share historical resources with our community. And Kristen's going to talk a little bit more about some of the project outcomes in a moment. So why this project and why now? So for about the past 15 years, we've been working closely with Wisconsin local history organizations to help folks digitize and share their historic resources in Recollection Wisconsin, which also serves as our state's DPLA hub. So through these relationships and work, we realized over the years that folks need more or different degrees of support than simply sharing some scanning specifications or metadata standards or making a recommendation for which scanner to buy. We recognized that local history practitioners needed more support throughout their digital project's lifecycle, from project planning to digital preservation and all the steps in between. There are more learning opportunities needed to support work all along the digital project spectrum, which led to the development of this project and the resources we're creating as part of it. It's important to note that our goals and activities are community-driven based on formal and informal information gathered over many years, but also through more recent information gathered during our 2019 planning grant from web surveys, community conversations, and strategic planning sessions with local history practitioners around the state. In 2019, we surveyed over 400 local history organizations about their digital readiness needs and received approximately 120 responses from practitioners and organizations. We then facilitated 5 community conversations around the state and probed a bit deeper into some of the key questions raised. And finally, we convened 3 strategic planning sessions to further distill the results of our information gathering. This resulted in a strategic plan and laid the foundation for our implementation grant, this project, and our goals and activities. And for those of you interested in the details, we will have a white paper that details our information gathering process and results, and this will be accessible on our website in the next couple of weeks. Again, I'll emphasize at its core, this is a community-driven initiative. We time and time again have asked local history practitioners how best to support their digital readiness and their digital projects work, and we responded with this project. I want to give a quick shout out to a whole bunch of people who are currently serving as members of our project launch committee. This self-selected group participated in all aspects of our planning grant work and then signed on to continue shepherding this effort in this year. And they've been great. They represent local history organizations, museums, public libraries around the state. Our group meets monthly and they provide guidance. They review and help develop some of our learning resources. They're currently helping to plan some of our summer events and so much more. They really are our sounding board, our eyes and ears around the state, and they provided really valuable perspective from local history organizations, their staff, volunteers, their patrons, and their community members. They are also, in essence, the community of practice that we hope to grow and evolve over time. We're also fortunate to have 3 other key project advisors, Recollection Wisconsin lead Emily Fotenhauer, and 2 staff members from the Wisconsin Historical Society Outreach Division, Janet Seymour and Kristen Leffelman. So before I hand over to our next panelist, we have a quick question for you to ponder and share your thoughts in chat. What digital readiness questions or needs do you or your organization have? Think about that as you're listening to our panelists this afternoon, and feel free to throw your thoughts in chat throughout our presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Kristen Whitson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. And we asked that question in chat really on purpose to help you become a part of this community-driven initiative, the feeling of being a part of the community of practice. So we really would love to hear from you what digital readiness questions or needs you have. So as Vicki said, I'm Kristen Whitson. I'm the program assistant for this digital readiness project. I'm here for the duration of the grant period to help implement the initiatives, tools, and resources that Wisconsin's cultural heritage community said that they needed in those surveys, conversations, and focus groups that Vicki talked about. I'm going to tell you a bit about those resources and tools today. So we're going to talk about the digital readiness levels, which is a roadmap to digital readiness, the digital projects toolkit and implementation guide, which are still in the works, the digital readiness glossary, a series of digital readiness case studies, and this summer's digital readiness fairs. So all of what I'm going to tell you about is really the what and the how of the project. What Vicki shared is the why, as in why this is important and needed. What I'm going to tell you about is how Recollection Wisconsin and our funder, the NHPRC, responded to those needs. So let's talk about the digital readiness levels first. And Vicki is putting a link to the digital readiness levels in the chat. So you can either follow along on our screen or you can follow along on your own if that's what you'd like to do. The digital readiness levels are based on the NDSA levels of preservation with which many of you are probably familiar. And like the levels of preservation, the levels of digital readiness are intended to be an accessible, non-consecutive way of assessing and progressing through the guidelines. So as I said, Vicki's dropped a link in the chat in case you want to look at those a little bit more closely. I'm also going to have them up here. So as you can see, the levels are set up in 7 functional areas across 3 tiers. And just like the levels of preservation, an organization can start, end, or progress anywhere in these levels of digital readiness. An organization may have a gold level plan in the plan and prioritize area, but they may not have even considered sustainability or evaluation, and that's okay. That's exactly what these levels are here for. And that's exactly what the community of practice is here for too. Vicki and Emily Pfotenhauer drafted the original version of these levels based on the feedback, questions, and concerns they'd been hearing from digital projects partners over the years. That original draft version was submitted with the grant proposal. And then once the grant was funded, we undertook a community feedback and revision process to revisit and reimagine the levels. We sent the levels and some questions to a network of about 70 projects experts, colleagues, volunteers, and contacts. I haven't looked at the participant list here today, but I would not be surprised if some of you were on that list. So if you were, thank you very much for your feedback. We also split our launch committee into work groups and had them focus specifically on a few of the functional areas at a time. Soliciting and incorporating all of this feedback into the next version of the digital readiness levels was really essential to our community-driven community of practice model, and it was really effective. We got really important feedback about the structure, language, and accessibility of this foundational document, all of which we incorporated into the version that you see here. If you've ever undertaken a digital project, large or small, you'll see that the functional areas here, these focus areas over on the left-hand side, hew pretty closely to the actual experience of taking a project from beginning to end. And that's on purpose. The levels fit real life, everyday experiences of cultural heritage practitioners, especially in small and under-resourced historical societies or organizations. Also, we're not done. This is not the final version of the digital readiness levels. It's version 2.0, but not the final one. We're going to continue collecting feedback throughout the grant period and beyond. And we envision this being a living document subject to changes and revisions to best fit the needs of the community of practice. In fact, we'd love to hear from you either in this session or watch for our contact information at the end and let Vicki or I or both of us know what you think. If you would like to see any changes or additions or subtractions or whatever you think, we'd love to hear from you. You'll notice we have a second page here, the check as you go section. It really emphasizes how recursive this process is. You do something, you check to make sure it's working. You do another thing, you make sure that thing is documented. And as with the levels themselves, it seems to us, and we've heard this from the community of practice, that these are the kinds of questions that cultural heritage practitioners are really asking themselves in part or in whole during stages of digital projects. So we gathered and collected the questions here to help those undertaking digital projects remember to ask these questions at each stage of the process. So next, I want to tell you about the Digital Projects Toolkit, which I believe Vicki is dropping a link to in the chat. Of the many helpful things we heard from the community of digital projects colleagues, One of the most important is that you all, need both a place to start that doesn't feel overwhelming and the specific tools to do the things you want to do in your digital projects. As Vicki said, our community of practice, they need more than just metadata standards and scanner recommendations, but they also still need metadata standards and scanner recommendations. We're in the process of combining existing Recollection Wisconsin instructional materials, which is what's available in the link that Vicki shared now. And we'll be adding digital readiness specific workflows, checklists, and guidelines. A lot of this material already exists in the Recollection Wisconsin's current iteration of the Digital Projects Toolkit. We're just adding, revising, and refining. And in keeping with our community-driven model, the whole package will be workshopped and reviewed extensively by our network and our launch committee members before being published at the end of the grant period, which is the end of September. All right, another tool that is available right now, right this moment, you can go look at it if you want to, is the Digital Readiness Glossary. So among all the other feedback we got from our colleagues, we heard that archives and digital collections jargon and acronyms can feel really off-putting or overwhelming to some community members. One way to address that is for us to define commonly used terms and acronyms in an easily accessible way. So we developed this glossary, again, in coordination with the community of practice and our launch committee. We borrowed, with credit, you'll see, definitions from many well-known sources. Oftentimes, we even rewrote those definitions in more plain language. We put this glossary into an Airtable. I mean, if you're interested in the technical details behind the scenes, we put the glossary into an Airtable and embedded it on our website to make it easy to update the glossary with suggestions and revisions. But it's also available on that site to print in a PDF for those who would prefer a printed version. This is another tool we want to keep collecting feedback on. There's a link to email us right on that page with suggestions, additions, or changes. Please feel free to let us know your thoughts. And if this glossary would be helpful to you in your own work, please feel free to bookmark it and consult it whenever you need it. Another tool that's available right now is a growing set of digital readiness case studies with local history organizations here in Wisconsin. And to be honest, when this project started, I did not anticipate that these case studies would play such a significant role in the project. But as it turns out, they've turned out to be very valuable resources that are really foundational to the way that this community of practice is forming. So both the process of creating the case studies and then the results of sharing those case studies have helped build community relationships and resources. Vicki and I have conducted interviews, oftentimes multiple interviews, with cultural heritage organizations in Wisconsin who have undertaken various digital projects, and they have advice, lessons learned, tips and tricks to share with the wider community about digital projects. This is one of the ways that we're responding to the community's request for real life practical advice from folks who have actually done the work. Conducting those interviews gives us an opportunity to make connections between organizations sometimes too. Not everybody has the bird's eye view that we have at Recollection Wisconsin, working with all of the cultural heritage organizations in the state. So then sharing the interviews puts organizations in the spotlight so that others can learn from their experiences. So check out our case studies so far on the website, linked here in the presentation or in chat. Finally, the culmination of so much of what we've heard, learned, experienced, and taught this summer's digital readiness fairs, which we're very excited about. These free virtual events are open to the public, but require registration, which is actually now open. So please feel free to register if you'd like to attend. The 4 events are not a series. There's going to be some content that's repeated over the 4 of them, and then there's some individual speakers that are unique to each event. Local history practitioners and invited guest experts will share their experiences working with digital projects, including best practices, challenges, successes, and a few lessons learned along the way. We're excited to showcase digitization projects from around the state and help folks build their own community of practice with others engaged in digital projects. Participants will also learn more about our ongoing digital readiness work, Recollection Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Historical Society's local history affiliates program. These fairs are being virtually hosted by members of our launch committee. So again, keeping with the community-driven model, and the hosts are doing much of the planning for these events themselves. After all, they know their own communities best. They know what local history colleagues are doing and what they need, and they know how best to bring practitioners together. The fairs will include some informal social times before and after each fair for colleagues to connect with one another. And one main goal of the fairs is to further build the community relationships based on similar project needs. So far, some of the invited speaker topics include an overview of a local history newspaper digitization project, a talk titled Baby Steps to Digitization, a session on the use of Clio, the history app, and how digitized materials are used for outreach, and many more. Check them out. Feel free to register to join us if you're so inclined. And next, you will hear from Robin Untz. And just a reminder too, if you haven't answered that question about digital readiness needs or concerns, please feel free to put that in the chat.
Okay, hi, I am Robin Untz, and I'm with the Lake Mills Ashland Historical Society. I'm the current acting president and curator of our organization. Our museum site has 2 original buildings, the 1852 brick church, which acts as our museum, a one-room schoolhouse, as well as 6 other log cabins and buildings that were moved to the site to be preserved. We are a neighboring property to the Astalon State Park, which gives us a unique dynamic in preserving and sharing our local history. The site has been a long-standing location used for education, recreation, and research by a wide array of people, ranging from the family genealogists to academic researchers. Sorry, moving on to the early challenges. When I first started volunteering with the society, they were on track to close. Interest was waning and participation was lacking from volunteers and board members. Some of the early challenges relating specifically to digital preservation were how do we stay relevant in this new world that is so reliant on digital content and tools. We are also a very traditional museum without updates and no technology. We don't have air conditioning or even heat at our site. How do we get volunteers and board members on board to digitizing our archives while we are also tackling basic maintenance of historic buildings and collections? We quickly learned we were lacking several things, including organization of our physical and a small collection of digital archives. We didn't have control of our archives fully, meaning that other organizations were using our archives without consent. We had the issue of unsupervised access to our archives, which were stored at the local library. No user agreements or fees were being assessed, and some archives simply walked off over the years. And although we want to begin digital preservation, we lacked a method to start and distribute the workload of digitizing and the process to engage volunteers successfully. Moving on to the next slide, some of the first steps. So we had a lot of new board members step up with some new energy and skills and knowledge. who help with many of the aspects of maintaining the museum site and administrative tasks, but a few were able to help with the digitalization preservation. We knew that we had to start with some basic methods to engage the public and recapture their interest. We did so by creating and revamping some of our digital presence, including updating a website and social media, including programs, outreach, and more education. My daytime job is as a municipal clerk, so I have a certain way of looking at tasks, which focuses on efficiency and sustainability. My thought process was, how do we get these first steps in digital preservation organized in a way that is simple, efficient, communicates to the public while being sustainable with such limited resources? Thankfully, social media is an extremely low cost and effective way to have a web presence to start connecting with the public. But to have a presence in a digital world, you have to have digital content to share. Unfortunately, most of that work has fallen on me, although I enjoy it because I was the one with the computer skills and the knowledge of how to get these first steps of digital preservation moving. I always had the support of the new board, but not all have the time or the skills or the abilities to help. Although they have been willing to try to learn, I felt I was lacking a way to convey the tasks to these volunteers that made it possible for them to be successful in those tasks. I felt like I was missing tools to give the volunteers to get the work done. Digitizing was cumbersome, even for me, without the guidelines and the tools, let alone a volunteer who isn't familiar with the archives or the processes. This was simply because there was no plan of attack or organization. So reality, it was cumbersome because we lacked a plan. We lacked organization of the archives, both the physical archives as well as the digital. We lacked a plan to train volunteers. We lacked simple guidelines from point A to point B in the processes that people could follow. We needed a plan to be successful. So basically, we needed to establish an approach to digitalization, be able to recruit volunteers to do the work, train them for successful results. So opportunities. When the opportunity came up to participate in CCDC, I nabbed it up. Being from a small organization, I felt this was a rare opportunity to participate in a program like this. I was hoping to find some guidelines and validate some of the ideas I had on how to approach these challenges of creating digital content and the bigger picture of digital preservation. I had questions about physical and intellectual control of our digital archives because of the other organizations that had been using them, and how some of the control and had some of the control over the content, as I mentioned before. During the time our organization was not fully functioning, and there was no one overseeing our archives. Other questions I had were, how do we make our digital content more accessible and user-friendly to be shared and researched without it becoming the burden or the work of one person on the board or a volunteer? All of this is vital to our organization and how we function, and others to stay relevant and help sustain our collections long-term so we can continue with our missions. I had a lot of questions, and I knew certain things needed to be done, but the question was still how. The opportunities at CCDC and networking with Wills, Recollection Wisconsin, and other organizations and professionals, as well as participating as a launch committee member for the Digital Readiness Community of Practice, has given me an avenue to get some of these questions answered. Take away ideas and information from others in the network, share experiences. We were even a digital readiness case study. It makes sense to provide these same resources as in an organized manner so all organizations can use them, hence the work done by the community of practice. A step back. Taking a step back to our opportunity to participate in CCDC, I worked with Claire Flood, a UW-Madison graduate student, where we realized that although the information we were learning at CCDC was fantastic, in my mind, I was saying, this is really good stuff. I was thinking, we are so not ready for this. There was a gap in front of us in the process of digital preservation. We are at a place as an organization that the others participating in CCDC were not. We didn't have established or well-established digital archives. We don't have staff. We didn't have the equipment, the knowledge, or even a space to do the work. We were very much at the grassroots starting point, and had to take a step back or even off the timeline of the digitalization process to set us a foundation to start from. We had to see the bigger picture to find the solution. So we took a mental and organizational step back to do so. Thanks to Claire's hard work, we started with a simple digital preservation plan and an Excel spreadsheet for our session record that everyone with basic computer program knowledge could use. We used the resources provided at CCDC to create both of these and get the ball rolling for us. The resources provide guidelines for scanning, naming and documenting, establishing process for the work, and a sustainability. It laid out best practices for storage, protection, control, and use of digital archives that can easily be followed by anyone, which is the key, simplicity. Even if volunteers or staff don't know the terms of digitalization, they could still follow the simple plan. To regroup and move forward. As CCDC came to an end, I felt a bit more prepared to implement our roughly established processes. Although when I explained the plan and processes to my fellow board members, I was still getting some blank stares and hearing crickets. They were very supportive and trust me with this as I move forward with this effort, which I greatly appreciate. And I feel confident that as they see the processes unfold as our volunteers implement our plan, the pieces of knowledge I've shared with them will start to come together so they can see the bigger picture, excuse me, as well as where the gaps are holding us back in taking those first steps to digital preservation. I've learned to be okay with where we're at in the processes, which is basically the ground floor. In some ways, we have the advantage of being at this stage. With the opportunity we have using the information put together by the community of practice, we are starting with a solid plan that has been honed. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We are not having to undo past mistakes or reorganize in complex archives. The community of practice tools we have helped to make it easier to take those first steps in an organization. Knowing that this is not a race or a competition and who gets this done first also helps, because digital preservation never ends and this is always evolving. And we are absolutely not alone in learning and developing our digital archives to make it something better. I'm looking forward to sharing our story more to help demystify digital preservation for other organizations like ours, as well as seeing how this community practice can work for them and could potentially be used outside of historical archives world because of its simplicity. For me, I can see the potential of using many of these processes and guidelines in my work as a municipal clerk in record keeping. There is little to no training, guidelines, or regulations on how to digitize, organize, or store digital records for small governments who can't afford to hire consultants or service providers to do the work for us. And it comes full circle if we think about it. As many of us know, some of the historical archives we manage start off as government municipal records, such as land ownership documents, tax rolls, maps, vital records, etc. Wouldn't it be great if when they were donated, they were already in the format that we could easily deposit into our archives because the donors use the digital preservation practices? Thank you for letting me share our story and my thoughts about this journey, and I look forward to any questions you may have. So before I hand it over to our next panelist, think again about the question we asked earlier. What digital readiness questions or needs do you or your organization have? Feel free to throw your thoughts into chat. And now we are going to hear from Janine.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everyone. I am Janine Mollett Van Beckham. I am the Curator of Collections and Exhibits at the Tower Heritage Center operated by the Washington County Historical Society in West Bend, Wisconsin. Today, I'm going to give you a quick overview of a project that snowballs every time we look at it, and how the community of practice could have helped years ago in the planning phase, and how it can still be helpful today as we try to work our way through some of the mess that is our photo digitization project. Slide, please. So a bit of background on WCHS and how the project got where it is today. When I started at WCHS in 2006, I was hired as the head archivist of the research center. I was in that position for about 2 years before moving to my current curator position, and I was the first person they hired that had any formal museum or archive experience. Before that, it had been volunteer run, and the paid positions were mostly on the administration side. And although those administrators had nonprofit experience, none of them had any museum, archive, or library specific experience. So there wasn't a lot of guidance on that side of things. The few policies and procedures that have been informally established and the cataloging system had been set up by the volunteers. And at the time, the photo digitization project was actually about 3 years old. They had a scanner, but they had no set procedures or guidelines for scanning or how they planned to handle any of the data in the future. And coming in with fresh eyes, it was easy to see there was going to be problems. But if you've ever been at an organization that was transitioning from volunteer to professional staff, you know that the politics can be a little bit tricky. And the internal politics at the time did not allow for changes. It was actually about 10 years more before we could really start to make the needed changes in the archive side of things. So this project was one of those that was started without much forethought other than we want to get the photos scanned and put them into PastPerfect. We also want to be able to scan photos so we can take loaned photos and return those loans to people without keeping the original. It wasn't really for preservation purposes. It was more of a collect everything and we want everything as fast as possible mentality. Because the original cataloging was really fast and dirty with minimal descriptions, many duplicates were also taken of those photographs over the years, to where we now have over 17,000 individually scanned and cataloged photographs in our collection. There have been 2 other archivists since me in that position, and the physical scanning of all the photos was finished in 2018. For several years, we kept 2 copies of all of those scans. We had a working JPEG and TIFF on a cheap DVD-RW, and then a master TIFF that was kept on a gold DVD, as at the time they were thought to be more stable. There were also JPEGs put into PastPerfect, and then some of the photos over the years were put onto our server. Our server and PastPerfect are backed up every night, so those have been kind of up to date. So we have multiple copies in multiple formats in several locations, which isn't necessarily a good thing, especially if people are changing file numbers and not changing them across the board. We were starting to look at migrating the data off the DVDs about a year ago. Our current archivist started about 2 years ago, and she kind of got her feet wet and figured out the collection. And then we decided we can now move forward with some of these bigger projects, and that was one of them. The realization that we needed to move quickly came when I needed high quality scans for an exhibit, and I found that many of the files on both the DVD-RWs and the gold DVD-Rs were corrupt. So we decided this now needed to be a priority. Next slide, please. And as we started diving into this is the snowball effect. We found out that the previous archivist had actually deleted a lot of the duplicate photos, and there were hundreds of them, and then reused the numbers. The record keeping on the deletions is pretty much non-existent. And in some cases, the DVD-R files were updated, but you can't update the DVD-Rs. Sometimes the DVD-RWs were updated, but the ones in PastPerfect weren't, or the ones on the server were not updated. So basically, we can't assume that the DVD-RWs match the DVRs or anything in PastPerfect or the files on our server, as none were consistently updated as changes were made. So we're now in the position that we're going to have to go through each file and cross-check it with PastPerfect and make sure the correct photo is associated with the correct catalog number. Slide, please. Although the problem of none of the files and cataloging numbers match, along with the problem of none of the files and catalog numbers matching, we have found that many of the files were corrupt and will need to be rescanned. Some of these will be impossible to do as they were loaned, and a lot of the paperwork, we don't even know where the loans came from originally, so we can't even go back to the loanees and ask to borrow them again. On top of this, the original numbering system used throughout the archives was geographically linked and cannot really support many of the photos, especially modern photos, that we get in today. So if a photo was of someone who lived in West Bend, it would go under the West Bend file number set. people don't stay in the same communities like they used to. They move around a lot. So this numbering system just does not work anymore. So the first thing we have done, and because we don't want to add to the mess with all of the number changes and everything from the deleted photos, our first step was to retire that old numbering system and start anew. So those old original numbers are static and we don't have to worry about adding more to them at this point. Over the last few months, we've been brainstorming the best way to tackle our main problem of reconciling our catalog numbers. We've come up with a few solutions that didn't work. And we've now settled on our first step of moving all of the files from the DVDs onto the server so we can remove the corrupt files as we go. And then once everything's in one location, we can actually start the reconciliation process, because with it on multiple DVDs, it was just too hard and too confusing to go back and forth. Slide, please. So the moral of the story is planning is key. We found that we really had to stop and take a step back when we realized we had to plan for a fix, as well as the data migration and planning for the future, which was all our original project was. One key thing we have learned is that the original digitization project didn't evolve as standards and technology changed, and these types of projects need to change as things evolve. And you shouldn't be afraid to make those changes as needed. It will save you tons of time, resources, and many headaches in the future. If something like the community of practice had been available in 2003 when the WCHS volunteers had started this project, it may have mitigated many of the problems we're now facing. Slide, please. One of the keys to the community of practice is accessible, easy to understand language for every level of archive worker, whether they have a PhD or are just starting out as a volunteer. And for many organizations, having easily accessible resources is a must. It can be daunting to reach out to people you don't know, or even impossible because you might not know where to start. Having a community of practice that is accessible is imperative if we as a group want to move forward as technology advances and more organizations delve into digitization. It can be a lot to do correctly, and learning from others' mistakes and successes can save us time and resources in our own projects. We at WCHS have been able to utilize our professional connections as needed, but not everyone has those. So digitization is a very specialized arena. Even our archivist, who just finished her IMLS degree a couple of years ago, was very fuzzy on a lot of things and a lot of terminology. We really had to use our network to figure out what we were supposed to do and how to do it properly. There's a lot of intimidating jargon and complicated tasks that really need to be thought about and planned out. So the community of practice will be able to help with demystifying some of that and getting everyone on the right track from the start, so they don't end up in our mess, hopefully, and they can plan ahead. So that's all from me. Thank you. And now I will send it back to Vicki.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Janine and Robin in particular, for sharing your experiences. So Janine and Robin's stories may sound familiar to many of you. We're fortunate to have folks like Janine and Robin sharing their stories with our launch committee, with our community of practice, so we can all learn and grow from their experiences. It's these experiences that really motivated us to think creatively about how to build and grow this digital readiness community of practice that supports local history practitioners wrestling with these types of situations. More than anything, we want to help organizations and their staff build competence and confidence to accomplish digital projects, especially small, under-resourced local history organizations. Next slide. So we have time, I believe, for questions and discussion about our project, about digital readiness as a concept, about our panelists' project work, and more. I think Anna is going to mediate our Q&A. We have one more slide that has our contact information on it we can throw up now. You are welcome to keep in touch. If there's anything that you heard today really strikes a chord with you, that resonates, if you're interested in learning more about the project or even some of the resources, the digital fairs, feel free to reach out to the Digital Readiness Community of Practice. Kristen is our point person for that project. Her email address is on our webpage. And with that, I thank you, and let's open it up for some questions.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That was a great presentation. I hope everybody will consider going to the fair and keeping in touch with our presenters here. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes to respond to those. I can see we've got one already. Tim asks, how will eventual obsolescence of various digital media forms be addressed in this project?
Vicki, I can answer this just a little bit to start, and then feel free to jump in. Tim, your question is very, very common, and we hear this often. And so in that toolkit and implementation guide that I talked about that will be up by the end of this project, we're planning to include resources like checklists or links to here's who we know does a great job of AV digitization, vendors that we would recommend if somebody wants to use an outside vendor, or recommendations for equipment if you want to do this in-house. Our first Digital Readiness Fair, the one that's going to be on June 29th, also includes a session by Dorothea Salo, who runs RAD at the UW-Madison iSchool, which I think stands for Recovering Analog and Digital Data. I think that's right. And she is going to talk, the title of her talk is called Those Two Boxes of Tapes. And she's going to talk about what smaller local historical or individual practitioners can do with audiovisual materials and ways to get those digitized in a pretty low cost, low effort way. So those are a couple of different things we're doing. Do you want to add anything, Vicki?
No, I think that's great. And it's a good question. It's a common question. It's something that we did address as part of the project Robin mentioned, Curating Community Digital Collections, which was another grant-funded project that addressed digital preservation specifically. And we did talk a little bit about technology obsolescence. But those are the kinds of questions that we hope to address through the resources, the toolkit. The digital readiness levels will have a path to thinking about that question, and some resources to hopefully help folks find an answer to that question. I also really like that your closed captioning is now calling digital readiness digital wretchedness. It's what I see it keep. It's kind of funny.
So
ironic.
close.
So close. There are some aspects of digital work that is wretched, but hopefully we're going to render it less wretched for our community.
That's why we
practice.
talk about it, right?
Right.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's see. We don't have any more questions in there, but please feel free to type those in. We can be here for another couple of minutes if anybody's thinking. And I know our panelists will be open to talk to you outside of the presentation as well. All right. Looks like we've got one more coming. Okay, Janine, what was the reason for starting such a large scanning project?
Yeah, mainly it was to be able to put thumbnails into Past Perfect. So I don't think the volunteers at the time quite understood how to use Past Perfect. They didn't quite understand that you could keyword things and search that way. So their biggest push was to get it into Past Perfect so they could look at the photos.
And it wasn't 17,000 photos when you started, right?
No,
or when the project started.
It was a lot. It was probably around 10,000 when they started. But I mean, it was still a hefty collection. But yeah, it grew.
Yeah.
And obviously it didn't help because they were still taking duplicates, because they didn't have those, they couldn't search for them anyway. And if you have that many photos scanned in, and you can't search by keyword or anything, you're not going to be able to find them just by clicking through them. So.
Right. Well, we invite all of you to join us at a digital readiness fair this summer. There's one on June 29th, there's one on July 16th, there's one on August 3rd, and then the last one's on August 18th. And you can feel free to join us for more than one if you'd like. It is some similar information and some information that is unique to each location. We're also going to be recording those and putting them up online on Recollection Wisconsin's YouTube. So if you just want to catch the individual sessions, the unique ones, you're welcome to do that too.
I'll jump in and add that the fairs are free. There's no cost to participate, but we are asking folks to register. So you can find all that information on the website that we shared. And really what's happening right here, right now in this virtual space is kind of what we hope this community of practice will continue to be, whether it's virtual or in person, really just bringing people together to talk about digital project work, hear what other folks are doing, learn from each other's experiences. I think we all grow when we all come together and collaborate to solve some of these challenges.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
I suppose we can wrap up a few minutes early then. I hope that we'll see you all at the business meeting in about half an hour. And before you go, don't forget to scroll through the chat and see all of the helpful links that our presenters have put up in there.
they're all on our website too. So if you didn't catch them, it's okay. We'd gladly share them with you.
I was going to say come to the fair, but bring your own cotton candy. And then I realized cotton candy and archives are a bad combination. So forget about that. No sticky candy in the archives, right?
Thank you everybody for coming to the last session on a Friday afternoon. We really appreciate you being here. Do we just hang out until everybody's gone? Anna, I have a question for you. Will we have a list of everybody who attended this session? Is that something that you all collect?
We're just keeping track of numbers.
Okay. Makes sense. I didn't want to look during the presentation because I was afraid it would mess up my screen sharing. So Vicki glanced at it while we were in there, but I was just curious.
I saw a max of 84, I think.
I saw it get up to 91 at one point.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I will put that in then.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nice. Well done, you guys.
Well done, you all. I see we still have some attendees. So if everybody wants to hang out and listen to us talk, but we're just going to say good job ourselves.
And stop the recording.
Yeah.
Last time I recorded